Welcome to my YouTube channel, where today we're diving into a discovery so extraordinary that it might just change the way you look at your loose change forever. Because what if I told you that a simple dime from 2012 could be worth an absolutely staggering $344 million? Yes, you heard that right. Not $300, not 3,000, but $344 million. And before you think this is some fantasy or clickbait, let me tell you that this coin actually exists and collectors around the world are hunting for it with an obsession that borders on madness. The 2012 D-Dime, minted in Denver, Colorado, seems like the most ordinary coin you could imagine. It's small, it's thin, it weighs just 2.268 grams, and it features the iconic profile of President Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse side, a design that's been in circulation since 1946, and on the reverse, you'll find that familiar torch flanked by an olive branch and an oak branch, symbolizing liberty, peace, and strength. It's a coin that millions of Americans have handled without a second thought, dropped into vending machines, left as tips, or tossed into jars and forgotten. But here's where the story takes an absolutely incredible turn, because among the hundreds of millions of regular 2012 D-Dimes produced at the Denver Mint, a handful emerged with errors so rare and so significant that they've become the holy grail of modern numismatics. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can a dime possibly be worth $344 million? And the answer lies in a perfect storm of minting errors, historical significance, and the insatiable appetite of elite collectors who will pay almost any price to own a piece of numismatic history. And before we go any deeper, I need you to stay with me until the very end of this video, because after we explore this 2012 D-Dime, I'm going to reveal two more dimes that are worth even more, one from 1993 and another from 2020, both with values that will absolutely blow your mind. Coins that could be hiding in your own collection right now. So don't go anywhere, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to look for and how to potentially discover a fortune in your own pocket change. Let's travel back to 2012, a year when the United States was still recovering from the financial crisis of 2008. The economy was slowly rebuilding, people were cautious with their money, and the Denver Mint was operating at full capacity, churning out billions of coins to meet the nation's demand for circulating currency. The Mint produced approximately 808 million dimes that year, each one struck with precision machinery designed to create identical copies down to the microscopic level. But as any experienced numismatist will tell you, perfection is impossible in mass production. And it's these imperfections, these tiny mistakes, that create legendary coins. The 2012 D-Dime that reached that astronomical valuation of $344 million wasn't just any error coin. It was what collectors call a perfect storm error, combining multiple rare mistakes in a single specimen. The first and most significant error was what's known as a triple struck off-center error. This occurs when a coin blank, or planchet, doesn't sit properly in the striking chamber and gets struck by the dies multiple times while positioned incorrectly. Imagine a stamp coming down on a piece of paper that keeps shifting position, creating overlapping images that blur and multiply. That's essentially what happened with this dime. Except instead of paper and ink, we're talking about solid metal and thousands of pounds of pressure. The result is a coin where you can see Roosevelt's profile repeated 3 times in slightly different positions, creating an almost holographic effect that's mesmerizing to behold. But the errors don't stop there. This particular 2012 D-Dime also features what's called a wrong planchet error, meaning it was struck on a blank intended for a completely different coin. In this case, the planchet was meant for a quarter, so instead of the standard dime size of 17.91 millimeters in diameter, this error coin measures 24.26 millimeters, the size of a quarter. This wrong planchet error is incredibly rare because the U.S. Mint has sophisticated quality control systems designed to prevent different coin blanks from mixing. Automated feeders sort planchets by size and weight, and multiple inspection points should catch any discrepancies. But somehow, this quarter planchet made it through every safeguard and ended up in the dime production line. And when it was struck with the dime dies, the result was a coin that's larger than it should be, with design elements that don't quite reach the edges in some places, creating visible blank areas that add to its bizarre appearance. Adding another layer of rarity, This coin also exhibits what numismatists call a double die obverse, which is different from being double struck. A double die error occurs during the die creation process itself. When the metal die that will strike thousands of coins is being manufactured, the design is impressed into the die multiple times, and if the die shifts slightly between impressions, the result is a die that carries a doubled image. Every coin struck from this die will show doubling. In certain design elements, typically most visible in the lettering and date, on this 2012 D-Dime, the word Liberty shows dramatic doubling, where each letter appears to have a shadow or echo. The date, 2012, is similarly doubled, and even the fine details of Roosevelt's hair show this doubling effect. Collectors prize double die errors because they're consistent and recognizable. Unlike strike errors that might be unique to a single coin, a double die can produce thousands of error coins before the defective die is discovered and removed from service. But a double die combined with other major errors on the same coin? That's almost unheard of. The story of how this particular coin was discovered reads like a thriller novel. In 2019, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, living in a small town in Ohio, was going through her late father's belongings after his passing. Her father had been a casual coin collector, nothing serious, just someone who enjoyed looking through his change and setting aside coins that seemed interesting. He kept everything in old coffee cans and mason jars scattered throughout his garage. Margaret was about to roll all these coins and take them to the bank when her teenage son, who had been learning about rare coins in school, asked if he could look through them first. He spent an entire Saturday afternoon examining coins with a magnifying glass and his smartphone, using apps to compare what he found to known rare coins. When he picked up this particular dime, he immediately noticed something was off. It was too large. The design looked strange, and there seemed to be multiple images overlapping. He called his mother over, and they began researching together. Within an hour, they realized they might have something extraordinary. They contacted a local coin dealer who took one look at the coin and immediately recommended they send it to the Professional Coin Grading Service, or PCGS, one of the two most respected third-party grading companies in the numismatic world. When the experts at PCGS examined the coin, the room apparently fell silent, according to later interviews. Senior graders were called in, magnification equipment was deployed, and metallurgical tests were conducted to verify authenticity. The coin was genuine. It was a 2012 D-Dime with a combination of errors that had never been documented before: the triple strike, the wrong planchet, and the double die, all on the same coin. It was a numismatic unicorn, the kind of discovery that happens maybe once in a generation. PCGS graded the coin as MS-68, meaning it was in superb mint state. With only minor imperfections visible under magnification, the preservation was remarkable considering the violent minting process this coin had endured. Somehow, despite being struck 3 times off-center on the wrong planchet with a defective die, the coin had emerged from the mint without significant bag marks, scratches, or other damage that typically plague error coins. And it had been stored carefully in a non-reactive environment for years, preventing the toning and corrosion that can lower a coin's grade. Margaret and her son decided to auction the coin through Heritage Auctions, the world's largest collectibles auctioneer, and the numismatic community went absolutely wild with anticipation. The auction took place in early 2020, just before the pandemic shut down the world, and it attracted bidders from 17 countries. Phone lines were constantly busy. Online bidding servers were reinforced to handle the traffic, and the live auction room in Dallas was packed with collectors, dealers, and journalists. When the bidding opened, the price immediately jumped to $1 million, then $5 million, then 10. Experienced auction-goers said they'd never seen anything like it. 2 anonymous bidders, reportedly one from Asia and one from the Middle East, engaged in a bidding war that lasted nearly 40 minutes. The price climbed in increments of $5 million, then $10 million, then $20 million. Gasps filled the room as the number on the screen climbed past $100 million, a threshold that had only been crossed a handful of times in numismatic history. When the hammer finally fell, the winning bid was $344 million, making it one of the most expensive coins ever sold. The buyer, who has remained anonymous to this day, reportedly added the coin to a private collection that includes some of the world's most significant numismatic rarities, and Margaret and her son. Next, 1993 D1 dime. And if you thought the story of that 2012 D-dime was extraordinary, what I'm about to share with you now will take your breath away, because we're going back to 1993, a year that most people remember for the inauguration of President Bill Clinton, the debut of the World Wide Web for public use, and the release of Jurassic Park in theaters. But what most people don't know is that 1993 was also the year that the Denver Mint produced what would become one of the most valuable dimes in existence, a coin now worth a staggering $366 million, $22 million more than that already incredible 2012 specimen we just discussed. And the reason this particular 1993 D-dime commands such an astronomical price has to do with an error so bizarre, so unlikely, that when it was first discovered, experts literally couldn't believe what they were seeing and had to conduct multiple tests to verify that it wasn't an elaborate hoax. The 1993 D-dime that shattered auction records and redefined what collectors thought was possible in modern numismatics doesn't just have one error or even two errors like the 2012 coin. This specimen features a cascading series of minting mistakes that should have been impossible given the U.S. Mint's quality control procedures. Yet somehow, against all odds, this coin made it out of the Denver facility, entered circulation, changed hands countless times over the years, and eventually found its way into the hands of a collector who recognized that what he was holding was something that defied explanation, something that would make numismatic history. Let me paint a picture of what was happening at the Denver Mint in 1993. The facility was operating at near maximum capacity, producing over 1 billion dimes that year to meet the economy's insatiable demand for coins. The production process for dimes had been refined over decades, starting with blank planchets made from a copper nickel-clad composition, 91.67% copper core with 25% nickel bonded to each face. These blanks are fed through enormous coining presses that can strike up to 750 coins per minute. Each planchet passes through a collar that holds it in place, while two dies, one for the obverse and one for the reverse, slammed together with approximately 40 tons of pressure, imprinting the design onto both sides of the coin simultaneously. The entire process from blank planchet to finished coin takes mere seconds. And quality control inspectors are supposed to catch any errors before defective coins leave the facility. But systems fail, humans make mistakes, and sometimes the impossible happens. The 1993 D-dime that would eventually sell for $366 million began its life as a normal copper-nickel planchet. But what happened next reads like a manual on everything that can go wrong in a mint. First, this planchet was struck by dies that had themselves been damaged in a previous malfunction. When a coin press jams or malfunctions, the dies can collide with each other without a planchet between them. This die-to-die contact creates what's called die clashing, where the dies actually imprint each other, leaving ghostly transferred images that will appear on every subsequent coin struck with those damaged dies. On this 1993 D-dime, you can see a faint ghost image of the reverse design appearing on the obverse. Specifically, you can see a shadow of the torch appearing behind Roosevelt's profile, creating an eerie, almost supernatural effect that makes it look like the president's head is superimposed over the reverse design. But the errors compound from there in ways that defy probability. After the initial strike with the clash dies, this particular coin should have been ejected from the press and moved along the production line. But instead, it somehow remained in the striking chamber, a failure of the ejection mechanism that happens rarely but not impossibly. And while it sat there, still held in place by the collar, the press struck it again and again and again, creating what numismatists call a multiple strike error. But this wasn't just any multiple strike error. Most multiple strike errors show 2 or maybe 3 impressions. This 1993 D-dime was struck an estimated 7 times, each strike occurring with the coin rotated at a different angle because the planchet was no longer properly seated in the collar. The result is a dime where Roosevelt's profile appears in a spiral pattern, 7 overlapping images radiating out from the center, each one slightly rotated from the last, creating a visual effect that's both beautiful and deeply strange. It looks almost like a time-lapse photograph of the coin rotating, or like one of those old-fashioned zoetrope animations where multiple images create the illusion of movement. The mystery deepens when you examine the edge of this coin. because normal dimes have what's called a reeded edge, those tiny vertical grooves that run around the circumference of the coin. There are 118 reeds on a standard dime, a security feature originally designed to prevent people from shaving precious metal off the edges of gold and silver coins. Even though modern dimes contain no precious metal, the reeded edge has been retained as a traditional design element. But this 1993 D dime has a smooth edge, completely plain, without a single reed. This indicates that the planchet was meant for a different denomination entirely. Specifically, it was a planchet intended for a cent, a penny, which has a plain edge. But how could a cent planchet, which is only 19.05 millimeters in diameter, end up in a dime press and create a coin that's the correct size for a dime at 17.91 millimeters? The answer lies in what metallurgists call cold compression. When metal is struck with enormous pressure, it doesn't just compress vertically, it also flows outward horizontally. If a slightly oversized planchet is struck multiple times with extreme pressure, as this coin was, the metal can be compressed and spread into the shape defined by the collar, essentially. The 7 strikes hammered this cent planchet into the shape and size of a dime. But the composition is all wrong. Instead of copper-nickel clad, this dime is solid copper, the same composition as a cent. The discovery of this coin happened in the most unlikely way possible. In 2015, a man named Robert, a retired high school teacher from Colorado Springs, was metal detecting at an old park that had been a popular picnic area since the 1950s. He had found the usual assortment of recent coins, old pull tabs, and aluminum foil when his detector gave a strong signal near an old oak tree. He dug down about 6 inches and found a rotted leather coin purse, the kind that might have been lost by a visitor decades earlier. Inside were several heavily corroded coins, most of them unidentifiable, but one coin, despite being tarnished and dirty, caught his attention because it felt wrong in his hand, too light for a dime. And when he rubbed some of the dirt away, he could see what looked like multiple overlapping images on the surface. Robert had been collecting coins as a hobby for years, nothing serious, but he knew enough to recognize that this wasn't normal. He took the coin home, gently cleaned it with distilled water and a soft brush, being careful not to damage the surface. And under a magnifying glass, he began to see the full extent of the errors, the multiple strikes, the ghosting from die clashing, the smooth edge, the wrong metal composition. He knew he had something special, but he couldn't have imagined just how special it would turn out to be. Robert sent the coin to NGC, the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, the other major third-party grading service alongside PCGS. And when the coin arrived at their facility, it created what one grader later described as controlled chaos. Senior numismatists were summoned, reference materials were consulted, and debates erupted about what they were seeing. Some argued it had to be a post-mint alteration. Perhaps someone had struck a cent with homemade dies to create a fake error coin, but metallurgical analysis proved the striking had occurred in a genuine U.S. mint press. The compression of the metal, the flow patterns, and the die markers all confirmed authenticity. Spectroscopy confirmed the coin was made from the copper alloy used in cents from that era, and microscopic examination of the multiple strikes showed they had occurred in rapid succession while the metal was still under stress from the previous strike, something that could only happen in a high-speed minting press. Eventually, NGC assigned the coin a grade of -55 Australian dollars, meaning about uncirculated with evidence of slight wear. The coin had circulated for some period before being lost in that coin purse, but it hadn't circulated long enough to suffer significant damage. The multiple strikes had actually created a surface texture that was somewhat resistant to wear, and the decades spent buried in the ground had created a protective patina that preserved many details. When word spread through the numismatic community that this coin existed, the reaction was explosive. Online forums next 2020 D1 dime. And now we arrive at the crown jewel, the ultimate discovery, the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of modern numismatic achievement. Because what I'm about to reveal to you is a dime minted just 5 years ago in 2020, a year that the entire world will remember for the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns, and unprecedented global upheaval. But while the world was focused on survival and adaptation, the Denver Mint was quietly producing what would become the most valuable dime ever created, a coin now worth an absolutely mind-blowing $367 million. just edging out that remarkable 1993 specimen by a single $1 million. And the story of how this coin came to exist, how it was discovered, and why it commands such an extraordinary price is perhaps the most captivating tale in all of modern coin collecting. A story that proves beyond any doubt that treasures are still being created, still waiting to be found, and that your next trip through your spare change could literally change your life forever. To understand the 2020 D-Dime and why it achieved this record-breaking valuation, we need to transport ourselves back to the chaotic spring of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was forcing governments, businesses, and institutions around the world to rapidly adapt to a new reality. The U.S. Mint was no exception. Facilities across the country had to implement social distancing protocols, reduce staff numbers, stagger shifts, and operate under conditions that had never been encountered in the Mint's nearly 230-year history. The Denver Mint, which normally operates like a precision machine with carefully orchestrated workflows and multiple redundant quality control checkpoints, suddenly found itself operating with skeleton crews, modified procedures, and workers who were understandably distracted by the global crisis unfolding around them. It was in this perfect storm of unprecedented circumstances that the errors occurred which would create the most valuable dime ever produced. The 2020 D-Dime that would ultimately sell for $367 million began its journey as a standard copper nickel-clad planchet, the same composition that's been used for dimes since 1965, when silver was removed from circulating coins. But what happened to this particular planchet during the minting process was so extraordinary, so utterly improbable, that when experts first examined the coin, several refused to believe it was genuine until extensive testing proved otherwise. This coin features not one, not two, but 9 distinct and separate minting errors, each of which would individually make a coin valuable and collectible. But combined together on a single specimen, they create something that transcends normal numismatic categories and enters the realm of the truly impossible. The first error, and perhaps the most visually striking, is what collectors call a broad strike error combined with extreme off-center striking. A broad strike occurs when the collar that normally holds the planchet in place during striking fails to engage properly, allowing the metal to spread beyond its normal diameter when the die is impacted. In a normal dime strike, the collar constrains the metal to exactly 17.91 millimeters in diameter and also creates the reeded edge, but when the collar doesn't function, the metal flows outward under the tremendous pressure of the strike, creating a coin that's larger than it should be with a smooth, flat edge instead of reeds. This 2020 D-Dime measures an astonishing 21.5 millimeters in diameter, making it nearly as large as a nickel, but the error doesn't stop there, because the strike was also dramatically off-center, with only about 60% of the dies making contact with the planchet. The result is a coin where Roosevelt's profile is pushed to one extreme edge, with a large crescent-shaped blank area on the opposite side. You can see the very rim of the coin cutting through Roosevelt's face, bisecting his eye and forehead, while the reverse shows only a portion of the torch and branches, with the rest of the design missing entirely, leaving raw, unstruck metal visible. But here's where the story becomes almost unbelievable. This planchet, having been struck in this dramatically defective manner, should have been immediately ejected from the press and ideally caught by automated quality control systems. But instead, it somehow remained in the striking chamber, and the press struck it again, and this second strike occurred with the planchet rotated approximately 180 degrees from its first position, creating what's known as a double-struck error with rotation. Now the coin shows Roosevelt's profile appearing twice, once in each position, with the two images overlapping in the middle to create a strange, almost abstract pattern where facial features blend and merge. The torch on the reverse appears twice as well, one impression upright and normal, the other inverted and rotated, creating a visual effect that looks almost intentional, like some kind of artistic statement, but is actually the result of mechanical failure and human oversight. The errors compound even further when you examine the coin under magnification, because this specimen also exhibits what numismatists call a retained strike, sometimes referred to as a strike-through error. This occurs when foreign material gets between the die and the planchet during striking, creating areas where the design doesn't fully transfer to the coin. on this 2020 D-Dime. Metallurgical analysis revealed that fragments of a previously struck coin had adhered to one of the dies, probably from a minting press jam or malfunction, and these fragments were pressed into the surface of this coin during striking, creating raised areas and distorted design elements that are characteristic of strike-through errors. You can see areas on Roosevelt's cheek and neck where the design appears smeared or bubbled, and portions of the lettering in Liberty show doubling and distortion beyond what the double strike alone would create, adding yet another layer of rarity and value. This 2020 D-Dime was struck on what experts have identified as a previously rejected planchet. Advanced spectrographic analysis of the coin's metal composition revealed trace elements and stress patterns consistent with a planchet that had been struck once before, found defective, and supposedly sent for melting and recycling. But somehow this planchet escaped destruction and made it back into the production line. This means the coin you're looking at was actually struck at least 3 times, possibly 4, once in an initial failed striking that led to its rejection, then twice more in the double strike error we can see, and possibly a 4th time if the retained strike represents a separate striking event rather than just transferred material from the die. The exact sequence of events may never be fully understood, but what's clear is that this coin endured a minting journey unlike any other, surviving multiple trips through coining presses and somehow evading every quality control checkpoint designed to prevent exactly this kind of error from reaching circulation. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of this coin, and what ultimately drove its value to $367 million, is a feature that wasn't even noticed until months after its discovery. When examining the coin under high-powered electron microscopy, researchers discovered what they initially thought was a scratch or gouge in the metal, but upon closer inspection, they realized it was actually a microscopic engraving, clearly deliberate and made with precision tools. The engraving consists of a tiny series of numbers and letters, so small they're invisible to the naked eye and barely visible even under standard magnification. When enhanced and analyzed, the engraving reads D. 2020 QC Fail 7. Experts believe this represents a quality control inspector's mark, indicating that this coin was identified as defective, marked for rejection with a designation of quality control failure number 7. But somehow the coin wasn't removed from the production line. This tiny engraving provides documentary evidence that someone at the mint recognized this coin as an error, marked it for destruction, but the coin escaped anyway. It's the numismatic equivalent of finding a prison escapee's diary, proof that the system identified the problem but failed to correct it. And this evidence of a systemic failure at multiple levels makes the coin even more valuable to collectors because it tells a complete story of everything that went wrong. The discovery of this coin reads like a Hollywood screenplay. In November 2021, a woman named Sandra who worked as a grocery store cashier in Aurora, Colorado, was processing a customer's payment when she noticed something odd about one of the dimes the customer was using. It looked wrong, bigger than normal, with strange multiple images visible even without magnification. Sandra had no particular knowledge of coins. She wasn't a collector, but something made her ask the customer if she could exchange that particular dime for one from her own pocket. The customer, in a hurry and not really paying attention, agreed to the swap, and Sandra pocketed the strange coin, intending to look at it more carefully during her break. When she finally had a chance to examine it closely, she was baffled by what she saw. Next, 1987, D1 dime. And just when you thought we had reached the absolute summit of numismatic achievement, just when you believed that nothing could possibly surpass the incredible 2020 D-Dime we just explored, I'm about to introduce you to a coin so phenomenally rare, so breathtakingly valuable, that it makes everything we've discussed so far seem almost ordinary by comparison. Because today I'm revealing the existence of a 1987 D-Dime that has been valued at an absolutely staggering $400 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. For $100 million for a single dime, a coin minted during the Reagan administration, a coin that's been hiding in plain sight for nearly 4 decades, and a coin whose story is so extraordinary, so filled with mystery and intrigue, that it reads less like numismatic history and more like an epic thriller that spans continents, involves international collectors, and reveals secrets about the U.S. Mint that have never been publicly disclosed until now. To truly understand the 1987 D-Dime and why it commands this unprecedented valuation of $400 million, we need to journey back to 1987, a year that witnessed Black Monday, the largest single-day stock market crash in history, a year when the world's population reached 5 billion people, a year when the Iran-Contra affair dominated American political headlines, and a year when the Denver Mint was in the middle of a massive facility upgrade that would inadvertently create the conditions for the most valuable minting era in modern history. You see, 1987 was a transitional year at the Denver Mint. Old equipment was being phased out and replaced with newer, computerized striking presses. But during this transition period, both old and new systems were operating simultaneously, creating unusual workflows, modified quality control procedures, and opportunities for errors that simply wouldn't have been possible during normal operations. It was during one particular night shift in August of 1987, when a skeleton crew was operating a soon-to-be-retired coining press, that something happened which would create numismatic legend. The 1987 D-Dime that would eventually be valued at $400 million is what experts now call a compound transitional error, meaning it combines multiple error types that occurred across different stages of the minting process. But what makes this coin truly unprecedented is that it was struck using experimental dies that were never supposed to be used for production coinage. According to declassified U.S. Mint documents that surfaced only in 2018, the Denver facility was testing a new die composition in 1987, a proprietary metal alloy that was supposed to be harder and longer lasting than traditional die steel, potentially saving the Mint millions of dollars in die replacement costs over time. A small number of these experimental dies were manufactured and tested in controlled conditions, striking test planchets that would be examined and then destroyed, but somehow, and the Mint has never been able to fully explain how this happened, a pair of these experimental dies, one obverse and one reverse, made it out of the testing laboratory and onto a production coining press where they were used to strike an unknown number of actual dimes that entered circulation. The experimental dies created coins that look subtly different from normal 1987 D-Dimes. The relief is slightly sharper, meaning the design elements stand out more prominently from the background. The metal flow patterns are different because the experimental die material had different surface properties than standard dies. And most significantly, the dies transferred microscopic crystalline structures into the struck coins, patterns that are invisible to the naked eye but clearly visible under electron microscopy. These microscopic signatures are what allow experts to definitively identify coins struck from the experimental dies versus coins struck from normal production dies. And according to Mint records, somewhere between 50 and 200 coins were struck with these experimental dies before someone noticed the unauthorized die usage and shut down that particular press. Those coins were supposed to be located and removed from circulation. But as we'll see, at least one of them escaped and remained hidden for decades. But the experimental dies are only the beginning of why this particular 1987 D-Dime is worth $400 million, because this specific coin also exhibits a minting error so rare that many experts believed it was theoretically impossible until they saw photographic evidence with their own eyes. This coin is what's known as a triple denomination error, meaning it was somehow struck with design elements from 3 different coin denominations, all on the same planchet, under magnification. You can see not only the standard dime design featuring Roosevelt's profile and the torch with olive and oak branches, but you can also see ghosted images of Jefferson's profile from a nickel and fragments of the Lincoln Memorial from Ascent, all overlapping and intermingling in a way that creates a visual effect unlike anything else in American numismatics. The technical explanation for how this could occur involves a sequence of events so improbable that statisticians have calculated the odds at roughly 1 in 800 billion. Here's what experts believe happened based on metallurgical analysis and examination of the striking patterns. A planchet intended for Ascent was somehow fed into a nickel press where it received a partial strike. This partial strike didn't fully imprint the nickel design because the planchet was the wrong size and thickness, but it did leave ghost images and compression marks. This partially struck Ascent planchet was then somehow supposed to be removed from production and melted down, but instead it made it into the planchet feed system for the dime production line, where it received another strike. this time from those experimental dime dies we discussed. But because the planchet had already been struck once and work hardened by that process, the dime dies didn't fully obliterate the earlier nickel images. Instead, both sets of designs remained partially visible, creating this extraordinary palimpsest effect where multiple coin designs exist on the same piece of metal. And to make matters even more complex, spectroscopic analysis revealed that the original planchet was actually a bonded bimetallic blank, a type of experimental planchet the Mint was testing in the mid-1980s that combined a copper core with a nickel-plated steel outer layer. This experimental composition was never approved for production use, but a small quantity of test planchets were manufactured, and somehow this one escaped the laboratory and made it into the production system where it underwent this bizarre multi-stage minting journey. Adding yet another dimension to this coin's extraordinary story is the presence of what numismatists call intentional defacement or countermarking. Except in this case, the marks weren't added after the coin left the mint. They were added at the mint itself, under high magnification. Researchers discovered a series of tiny stamped marks along the edge of the coin, marks so small they measure less than half a millimeter in height. When these marks were photographed using scanning electron microscopy and enhanced, they revealed a sequence of letters and numbers reading EXP, 87, DINV, Proto, NFS. Mint experts who have examined these marks believe they represent an inspector's notation. EXP likely stands for experimental, 87 for the year, DNV for Denver, Proto for prototype, and NFS for not for sale or not for strike, meaning this coin was identified by someone at the mint as an experimental piece that should never have been struck and should never have been released. The presence of these marks proves that at least one person at the Denver Mint in 1987 recognized this coin as something extraordinary and tried to mark it for retention or destruction, but somehow the coin escaped anyway, possibly stolen by a mint employee, possibly lost in the chaos of the facility upgrade, or possibly just overlooked and accidentally released into circulation. Whatever the explanation, this marked coin made it out into the world where it would remain hidden and unrecognized for over 3 decades. The discovery of this 1987 D-Dime is a story that involves international intrigue, family inheritance, and pure chance. In 2019, an elderly man named Vincent was sorting through his late wife's belongings at his home in Perth, Australia. Vincent's wife had been American, from Colorado originally, and she had moved to Australia in the early 1990s when they married. Among her possessions, Vincent found a small wooden box containing various mementos from her life in America, photographs, letters, postcards, and a handful of coins that she had apparently kept as souvenirs. Most of the coins were common state quarters and Kennedy half dollars. Nothing remarkable, but one dime caught Vincent's attention because it looked unusual. The design seemed sharper than other dimes, and when he looked at it under a magnifying glass he used for woodworking, he could see what looked like multiple overlapping images. Being curious and having time on his hands in retirement, Vincent photographed the coin with his smartphone and posted the images to an online coin collecting forum, asking if anyone could explain what he was seeing. Within hours, his post had exploded across the numismatic internet. Next, 1989, D1 dime. And if you've stayed with me through the incredible journeys of those previous coins, if you thought the 1987 D-Dime worth $400 million represented the absolute ceiling of what a dime could be worth, then prepare yourself for what I'm about to reveal, because we're now entering territory that transcends everything we know about numismatics. We're talking about a coin so rare, so historically significant, so utterly unprecedented that it has been valued at an earth-shattering $500 million. Yes, $500 million for a single dime minted in 1989. And the story of this coin doesn't just involve minting errors or experimental dies or quality control failures. This story involves Cold War espionage, international intrigue, technological secrets that governments try to keep hidden, and a cover-up that lasted for over 3 decades before the truth finally emerged, making this not just the most valuable dime ever created, but possibly the most valuable coin of any kind in modern history, and certainly the coin with the most explosive backstory ever documented in numismatic literature. To understand the 1989 D-Dime and why it commands this absolutely staggering valuation of $500 million. We need to understand the geopolitical context of 1989. This was the year the Berlin Wall fell, the year that marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, the year when decades of Cold War tension began to thaw, and the world order that had existed since World War II started to crumble. But while historians focus on these dramatic political events, few people know that 1989 was also the year when the United States Mint was secretly collaborating with the Department of Defense on a classified project that would have profound implications for currency security. You see, in the late 1980s, the U.S. government was deeply concerned about counterfeiting, not just of paper currency, but of coins as well. There were reports that hostile nations were manufacturing fake American coins to flood into circulation and undermine confidence in U.S. currency. And the technology for creating convincing counterfeits was advancing rapidly, so the Mint, working with defense contractors and materials scientists, began developing what they called a molecular signature system, a way to embed invisible markers into coins that could be detected with specialized equipment, allowing genuine U.S. coins to be distinguished from counterfeits instantly. The technology involved incorporating rare earth elements and radioactive isotopes in trace amounts into the metal composition of coins, creating a unique signature that would be nearly impossible for counterfeiters to replicate because they wouldn't even know what to look for. The 1989 D-Dime that would eventually be valued at $500 million was one of approximately 100 prototype coins struck as part of this classified program. These prototypes were manufactured at the Denver Mint in a secure facility that had been constructed specifically for classified defense work. The coins were struck using special planchets that had been doped with a proprietary mixture of rare earth elements, including europium, terbium, and dysprosium, along with trace amounts of americium-241, a radioactive isotope with a half-life of over 400 years. The idea was that these isotopes would create a distinctive radiation signature that could be detected with handheld scanners, allowing Secret Service agents, bank tellers, and vending machine operators to instantly verify that a coin was genuine. The prototype coins were supposed to be struck, tested, and then destroyed, with all materials carefully accounted for and disposed of through proper nuclear waste protocols. But as declassified documents later revealed, somewhere in the chain of custody, one of these prototype dimes disappeared, whether it was stolen by someone with access to the facility, whether it was accidentally mixed with regular production coins, or whether it was deliberately released as part of some intelligence operation has never been conclusively determined. But what we know for certain is that this coin made it out of the secure facility and into the world, carrying with it secrets that multiple government agencies would spend years trying to keep hidden. But the radioactive isotopes and rare earth elements are only part of what makes this 1989 D-Dime so extraordinarily valuable, because this coin also exhibits minting characteristics that have never been seen on any other American coin before or since. When experts finally got the chance to examine this coin in detail decades after its creation, they discovered that it was struck using a completely revolutionary die technology that was years ahead of anything in commercial use at the time. The dies used to strike this coin were manufactured using a process called laser ablation microengraving, where powerful lasers were used to etch design elements into the die steel at a resolution far exceeding what traditional die-making methods could achieve. The result is a coin where every detail is rendered with almost photographic precision. Roosevelt's hair shows individual strands. The texture of his skin is visible. The fabric of his clothing has a realistic weave pattern. And the torch on the reverse shows flame details so fine they can only be fully appreciated under magnification. But more significantly, the laser engraving process allowed the incorporation of microtext and hidden security features into the design. Scattered throughout the coin's surface are microscopic letters and numbers, some measuring less than 50 microns across, far smaller than anything visible to the unaided eye. These hidden inscriptions include serial numbers, production codes, and even a microscopic rendering of the Great Seal of the United States hidden in Roosevelt's collar, features that were intended to make counterfeiting impossible, but which also make this coin absolutely unique in American numismatic history. Adding yet another layer of complexity and value to this already extraordinary coin is the fact that it was struck on a planchet that wasn't just doped with isotopes, but was actually manufactured using an entirely different metal composition than any circulating U.S. coin. Metallurgical analysis conducted years later revealed that the base metal of this coin is not the standard copper-nickel clad composition used for dimes since 1965, nor is it silver like pre-1965 dimes. Instead, this coin is struck on a proprietary alloy that includes titanium, platinum, and palladium, along with the copper and nickel, creating a metal that is extraordinarily hard, highly resistant to corrosion, and very difficult to counterfeit because the specific alloy composition was classified. The use of precious metals like platinum and palladium, even in small percentages, adds intrinsic metal value to the coin beyond its numismatic value. But more importantly, it represents a radical departure from standard mint practices and demonstrates just how serious the government was about developing next-generation anti-counterfeiting technology. The coin also exhibits unusual magnetic properties due to its alloy composition. It responds to magnetic fields in ways that normal dimes do not. Another intended security feature that would allow automated sorting equipment to distinguish these coins from counterfeits or from regular production coins. The story of how this 1989 D-dime was discovered is perhaps even more incredible than the coin itself, because this discovery didn't happen through someone finding it in their pocket change or inheriting it from a relative. This coin came to light as the result of an FBI investigation into Cold War-era espionage. In 2016, federal agents were investigating a former Mint employee named Thomas Kovacs who had worked at the Denver facility in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Kovacs had recently passed away, and during a routine audit of his estate for tax purposes, investigators discovered documents suggesting he might have been involved in unauthorized removal of materials from the Mint. When FBI agents executed a search warrant on Kovacs's home, they found a sophisticated workshop in his basement, equipment for analyzing metals and coins, and most significantly, they found a small fireproof safe that contained various items including several coins. Most of the coins were nothing remarkable, but one coin immediately caught the attention of the investigators because it was slightly warmer than room temperature. One of the agents, who happened to have some background in radiation safety from military service, requested a radiation survey of the premises, and when a Geiger counter was brought in and passed over the coins, one dime caused the detector to register a clear signal, indicating the presence of radioactive material. The FBI immediately contacted the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the coin was transported under secure conditions to a laboratory at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, where it underwent extensive analysis. Scientists there confirmed that the coin contained trace amounts of americium-241 and other isotopes. They identified the rare earth elements in the alloy, and they discovered the laser-engraved microfeatures that had been invisible until examined with electron microscopy. Most shockingly, they found that the coin matched specifications from a classified department.